Okay, folks, thank you. Let's rejoin the conversation here. I'm excited today to be introducing Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan, a lot of you all know. He's absolutely a great leader on almost every conservative issue that we work on, whether it be federal spending, tax reform, entitlements, pushing back against cronyism in Washington. Jim's on the front line of all of these different battles. He arrived on the scene in many ways when he chaired the Republican Study Committee. As he chaired the Republican Study Committee, his leadership there was extraordinary, and that committee really flourished under his leadership. It became clear under his chairmanship that this was a guy to keep an eye on. Since leaving the RSC chairmanship, Jim's not slowed down at all. He's become, in many ways, I think, the voice of the conservative conscience in the House of Representatives. Now, on top of everything else that he's working on, he's taken on the very important work of transforming the welfare state, or we sometimes, slang around here, we call it Welfare Reform 2.0. As you know, this has been a very important issue to the Heritage Foundation. It's been at the core of what we've been working on for decades. Heritage was instrumental in the 1994 success, and we are determined to keep those victories and to keep transforming the welfare state. So he's been working hand in glove with Robert Rector and Jen Marshall here at Heritage to translate those ideas for how to keep going into legislative form. So his bill has been dropped, I think, this week. It's ready to go. We're going to make a massive push after this for co-sponsors. We want the leadership team to bring this to the floor. This is a very important piece of legislation. So he's been working with our people here. He's also joined one of our panelists, Bob Woodson, who I'm excited for you all to be able to meet during the panel. And he's gone out in the field to see firsthand what the kind of challenges that we face are. As you know, this is going to be an important one for us. So I want us to be able to find a way to push this afterwards. We're excited to help Jim on this bill. We're excited to advance it. Please welcome Jim to the stage.
Thank you, Tim. Don't clap. You haven't heard me talk yet. That's thank you, Tim. Thanks to Heritage. Look, the greatest policy think tank in the whole darn world. And anytime you can team up with Heritage, they're doing, well said, they're doing all the work. I just happened to get the privilege of introducing the bill on the House side. Senator Lee's going to introduce it on the Senate side. But Heritage has done all the analysis, done the work, and we so appreciate their work, not only in this legislation, but of course on all kinds of conservative issues. These two people over here are going to join me in the panel are the specific ones. Bob Woodson's, we've been down in Richmond about a year and a half ago. A group of us went down and saw firsthand what people getting in the trenches and going out and helping people, not just talking policy, not just sitting and saying big things and nice things, but going out and ministering, and I choose that word specifically, ministering to people and helping them improve their lives. And Jennifer Marshall, of course, has been tremendous. She organized the whole trip and has, done so much research in this area. Let me say it this way. If you're going to stop poverty, it seems to me in the broad sense, and I'm going to talk real brief and we'll get to the panelists because they're the experts. If you're going to cure poverty, if you're going to prevent most of poverty, three things you need: work, strong families, and free markets. I mean, it's really that simple. A work ethic and focus on work, a focus on marriage and family, and a focus on free markets. And let's be honest, this administration is not doing very good in any of those three areas. And that's why we need to change, and that's why we need to highlight this. And that's really what our bill is all about. And I want to just spend my few minutes here talking mostly about the first thing, and that's work. We crossed the line last week. You all probably saw the CBO report. We now have one of the two major parties in this country embracing this concept that less work and more help from government is now part of the Democrat platform. And I would argue we crossed that line last week. Did you hear the comments that Keith Ellison made? And I like Keith. He's a nice guy. Did you hear his comments yesterday on the Sunday shows? You heard what Nancy Pelosi said about job lock. You heard what Harry Reid said about job lock. I mean, it's sad to see one of the two major parties now, what I would argue, step over the line and embrace this idea that somehow it's good when people work less. We come from an entirely different focus, and this bill that we have is an entirely opposite direction. We think work's a good thing. And I would just ask you all to do one, let's just do a kind of a short exercise. Think about the first job you had. Very first job you had. Maybe it was a paper route. Maybe it was babysitting the neighbor's kids. Maybe it was working at a McDonald's or a Burger King or some other fast food restaurant. Maybe it was a waiter or waitress. For me, it was baling hay. I grew up out in the middle of nowhere in Ohio. It was baling hay and mowing lawns. First real business we had was mowing lawns. And I was thinking about this as I was over the weekend. The lessons I learned, my brother and I had a little lawn mowing business. And you think about the things you learned from that first business, how to manage money and manage resources. We had a kind of interesting operation. My dad was old school. And he said, all right, I'll provide the truck, a beater of a truck. I'll build the trailer, give you the two. We had 2 riding lawnmowers. We had 1 push mower. We had a weed eater and our tools and our gas cans and that kind of thing. He said, I'll provide those. You guys got to pay for the gas. You guys are going to have to, you hang out with your buddies, you have a date on the weekend, that'll come out of the money you earned from your first job. I mean, you learned to sort of manage the resource. And he was old school too. If you were screwing around and you broke something on the mower, you had to pay for that. If it was a normal wear and tear, he would cover that. You learned about work and the satisfaction you get from doing a job well. You get done, you see the nice lawn you mowed. You understand that you met the customer's need. I mean, you learned those basic values. And when we don't let people experience that, or we have policies that discourage that and disincentivize that, we're robbing them of the opportunity to learn those skills, those lessons, those principles, those values that we all got from that very first job. And we took those skills and lessons and principles on to some other better employment. I'm not, obviously not still mowing lawn, although I like to mow my own, and I do. But that's what we're missing, this focus on work. I mean, I was thinking the skills you learn, you learn to deal with people. We had these, it was funny, whenever someone would call our house, they'd find out that we were in the mowing business. I still remember this, too, with my dad. Someone would call, and we'd see him answer the phone. Yeah, the boys, they'll be, and we knew someone was asking for us to mow their lawn as well, and we figured we had about 20 at the time, and we didn't need any more. So we'd be in the background like, no, we don't want any more. And my dad never turned one down. When anyone called, we always took that additional lawn. But you learn to deal with people. We had, I still remember the Steinberger ladies, two older ladies who were never married, lived together, 2 sisters, and they had kind of a big lawn. Well, we quickly learned. A lot of times you pull into someone's house, you just grab the mowers and get to work because you had to get to the next one. But with that house, we always went and took a few minutes before we started to talk to them. Because we knew if we talked to them a little bit and visited with them a little bit, they were more likely to bake the chocolate chip cookies and have them waiting for us. And they did that so many times. You just learn those skills that are important in the business I'm in now, right? Still, we had to keep track, and you had to write down when so many people wanted it mowed on Thursday and Friday before the weekend. Just different things you had to do. But I guess my point is this: we're robbing people of the opportunity to get those same skills. And we have a bill that focuses on that focuses on how important work is. That central element. Our bill is real simple. Real simple. It says, let's do 2 things. Let's figure out what we're spending all the money on right now. Let's do an aggregate of all the 77 different means-tested social welfare programs your federal tax dollars are used to fund the various social welfare spending we do. Let's aggregate that. Let's figure that out. And let's require states, let's incentivize states to have work programs that actually make a difference in people's lives and teach them those lessons that we all learned, whether it was mowing lawns, flipping burgers, running a paper route, babysitting the kids' neck, whatever it happened to be. Let's teach them those basic skills so that you can move on to some better employment and something better in life. I think if you had a chance, and if you see this story, in here I got it, Wall Street Journal over the weekend. I thought it was interesting. Economist Casey Mulligan, did you guys see this story? Talking about this issue. He's the guy behind. We actually just sort of I guess in many ways luck or the skill of our staff at the Oversight Committee. We had Professor Mulligan speak at a subcommittee hearing about a year ago on the unemployment concerns and started talking about these issues. And of course CBO understood this guy had it right, and it was largely his analysis that was put into their analysis and this whole disincentive that now exists under Obamacare, and I would argue in the broader policies from this administration. But I think it's worth reading that if you get a chance. President Johnson, I'll finish here and we'll get to our panel. President Johnson said this: he wants to strike at the causes of poverty, not just the consequences. And that's what our bill wants to do as well. You want to get at what causes poverty? It's disincentivizing work. You want to get at what causes poverty? It's not focusing on marriage and family. And you want to get at what causes poverty? It's not adhering to free markets. And so when we focus on those things, good things can happen and we can move in the right direction. Last thing I'll say is, I used to say this to all the student athletes we got a chance to, some of you know my background before I got crazy and got in this business of politics and public life. I was assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State University. And I used to tell our student athletes all the time, hard work doesn't guarantee success, but it sure improves your chances. You want to achieve things in life that have meaning and significance, hard work's the best ticket. And when we have a culture and when we have government policies that go in the opposite direction, that's a mistake. And that's something we should all look to correct. And when you focus on that work component, that work ethic, you build the quality that I think is the most important character quality necessary for anyone to achieve anything of meaning, anything of significance, and that's self-discipline. It's so important. So I think I've shared this story with Tim before, but it stuck with me. At our high school wrestling coach at our high school, and wrestling is big at our school. My brother's the coach at our high school. We've won the state championship in our state the last 14 years in a row. It's a big deal. But the coach who got it all started at our school was Coach McCunn, was our coach back in the day. The wrestling room is named after Coach McCunn. He's passed on. He got cancer a few years ago and passed away. Had an amazing memorial service for this guy because he had a huge impact on students and student athletes in our school. And he would talk about discipline every day. At our school, he was the toughest teacher in our school. He taught chemistry and physics. I mean, I still remember, Jordan, this is chemistry class. It's not just any old class. You want to do well in my class? You better read the material the night before. You better come to class prepared. You better answer questions and participate in class. It's going to take discipline to do well in this class. This is chemistry. And then the wrestling room, oh my goodness, he would drive me nuts. He's like, self-discipline is the most important character quality necessary to accomplish anything of meaning, significance, the most important self. And I was like, would that guy shut up? He's driving me crazy. He sounds just like my dad. I get it enough from my dad at home, now I got to get it from coach at class and in the wrestling room. But he had a great definition, and it hangs in our wrestling room today. Discipline is doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it. And that meant doing things, I mean, you think about it, it meant doing things coach's way and you'd rather do them your own way. It meant doing things the right way when you'd rather do them the easy and convenient way. And the biggest problem in this town is we always do things the convenient way instead of the right way. This bill is about teaching people those qualities to help them do things the right way so they can experience the American dream, so they can better their lives and their families' lives. And it's all about focusing on these concepts of hard work and self-discipline. And that's why I'm so excited about it. We'll get there. It won't be easy, but, you know, you guys know this. Tell me anything in life that's worth doing that's ever easy. It's going to take work and effort, but when you're working with the Heritage Foundation, I'll bet on that team every time. Thank you all very much, and time for questions. Oh, we got to do panel. We're doing the panel, that's right.
Thank you, Jim. If I could invite our panel up now, and I'll introduce them as they come up. If you haven't had a chance to hear from Bob Woodson before, you're in for a treat today. Bob Woodson's founder and president of the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. He's been working with a lot of folks in Congress, like Jim said, getting them on the ground, getting them to talk with people, really to understand, to rub shoulders with folks and see what the challenges are that we face. And Bob's work has been really important to this effort. Jen Marshall here at the Heritage Foundation has been working a lot with Bob and with Robert Rector on this. And Jen's the director of our domestic policy studies here at Heritage, and we are really privileged to have her too. I'll open it up with a couple questions here, and then we can go to the audience. I think I'd like to start with Bob. Bob, your testimony at the Senate Budget Committee last year about Hurt with the Helping Hand, we saw that, very powerful. You shared a story about your niece in that testimony, and I think that's what we're really connected with a lot of people. Would you mind just sharing that with the group here today and talk about the implications of it?
Yes, when the chairman, first of all, started off by talking about when her father died, left behind 6 children, impoverished rural community. And welfare was important for the family to become restored, and they all went to college on government scholarships, and therefore that was her defense. And my response was that we generalize about poor people. We should disaggregate them. You have people who use welfare whose character's intact, like she did. And it was used as an ambulance service, not a whole transportation system. Then you got category 2, like the woman a mom in Wisconsin who saved $5,000 of her welfare check so she could send her daughter to college, and she was charged with a felony. And she reasoned, well, I made a decision, and therefore I'll stay dependent, not because she had bad character, it was just she made a conscious decision. So that's the second category. The third category, though, are those who are poor because of the chances that they take and the choices that they make. There are character deficits there, and who are alcoholics, who have babies out of wedlock and whatnot. To that last category, giving money to them only injures them with the helping hand. And I said that my own niece, back in the 90s, was an alcoholic, living in public housing. She had a small child. I spent a year and thousands of dollars trying to wean her off of that. Found her an apartment in Arlington, Virginia, away from Philadelphia, found her a job. And I went to pick her up at 2 o'clock in the morning at one of the most dangerous public housing projects in Philadelphia. When I went up at 2 in the afternoon, she was drunk. And I couldn't compete against public housing. I couldn't compete against food stamps. I couldn't compete. It was only after welfare reform 2 years afterwards was she compelled, therefore, to go out and work. And now she is on her feet. I say that to say that it's important for us to disaggregate that and recognize that help to that third category. People on the left tend to look at all welfare recipients as if they're category 1, and people on the right tend to look at all welfare recipients as if they're category 3. So we must adjust our interventions to meet the category of people we're trying to meet. So we must frame it properly.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And just one other question. I know this will probably come up. Talk about the importance of bringing folks like Jim and Paul Ryan and some of the other folks you've had. Talk about why you think it's so important that we as conservatives get out there and do this.
I think as conservatives, we talk a lot about, I think people on the left, as Bill Bennett said, when they look at poor people, they see a sea of victims, and people on the right see a sea of aliens. Mm-hmm. And I think when we talk about poor people, we spend too much time talking about their deficits and their shortcomings and giving statistics about the 70% who are born out of wedlock. People are not motivated to change and improve by warning them about injuries to be avoided. We as conservatives must inspire people to talk about victories that are possible. The grassroots, instead of always focusing on the 70% of the families that are raising children in deficit communities, we should look at the 30% living in those communities that are raising children that are not dropping out of school or in jail and drugs. And we should go in, scholars, and ask this 30%, what is it that they are doing that's different than their neighbors? And how can we then insinuate support and resources into them so that the 30% can begin to affect the 70%? So we should be the champions of the 30% as much as we are opponents of the 70%. And therefore, and Jim has seen firsthand what happens when you go in to communities that are suffering the problem that are character challenges. It requires an intervention by those who are living in the same cultural zip code and the same geographic zip code. Nothing is more powerful to a person trying to find new direction than exposure to a witness that transformation is possible. And a witness is more powerful than an advocate. And so what we do at the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, and Jim was a party to this, is go into those neighborhoods and identify people that are healing agents. We know that the human body is oriented towards health, so that the moment there's injury, healing begins. And so what we must do as conservatives is go in and identify those community antibodies and find creative ways that we can insinuate resources, information, and money so that these individual antibodies collectively become a whole immune system, so that therefore the body of the neighborhood is healed from the inside out and the bottom up. So we should be, because many of those healing agents, these grassroots people, embody conservative principles. They believe in sacrifice, they believe in struggle, they believe that the victimizer might have knocked you down, but the victim has to get up. They believe in all the things that but they're unarticulated conservative principles. And so when Jim had seen, and Paul Ryan has, when you go in there, the qualities that make them effective also renders them invisible. They're not whining or complaining or petitioning government. They're just busy doing your work. You've got to act like a Geiger counter and find them. They're not looking for you. And once you do, you must recognize the strengths that they have and try to build on their strengths and enable them, rather than going in and imposing policies on them. There were many barriers that we found, for instance, in drug and alcohol. As Pastor Freddie Garcia said, if our problems in America with alcoholism and drug addiction were economic, God would have sent an economist. If our problems were education, he'd have sent an educator. But because our problems were sin, he sent a savior. But that's something else.
Thank you, Bob. I'll ask one more question, and then we'll open it up for Jen. We just recently had a lot of commentary about 50 years since the War on Poverty was launched, and it's been an opportunity, I think, to talk about what our solutions are as conservatives. But maybe you could briefly give an assessment of the 50-year War on Poverty, and then talk about what it's going to take for us to break through with our ideas.
Yeah, the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty was January 8th, and as Congressman Jordan has already said, President Lyndon Johnson very rightly said he wanted to attack the causes of poverty, not the symptoms. That's a very noble intention. But how is it borne out? Well, today that War on Poverty comprises 80 different programs that provide cash, food, housing, medical assistance, and targeted social assistance to poor and low-income Americans. And we're spending at all levels of government nearly $1 trillion per year, a total price tag over the years of $20 trillion. Now, I bring that up only to say that if we were going to win this war on poverty by spending, we would have done it a long time ago. So we've got to look more deeply at the things that Bob's calling us to look at, the incentives, the incentive structure within these welfare programs. And this is just as true for any private enterprise that's trying to tackle poverty. Incentives matter. And so in the same time period, the unwed childbearing rate has gone from single digit to 40% overall. We have some markers that we need to be aware of, but then get very focused on the incentives that are going to bring out the success stories that Bob is talking about. And that's what Congressman Jordan's legislation will do. It brings a food stamp work requirement into the puzzle, and that's just emblematic of one program. By the way, in 1996 with the TANF reform, the welfare reform that was so widely hailed, left and right, as a great success because it transformed the old aid to families with dependent children into a path towards self-sufficiency. It required work and made sure that people were engaged in work activities over time. And that led to dramatic effects. The welfare rolls fell in half, child poverty reached a historic low, and that, unfortunately, was not a lesson to say, let's repeat that success in others of these 80 programs, but too many people walked away and said, the job's done. Well, the job is not done. We have not done justice to the poor in the United States, and we need to keep working. We need to build on that success. The next step is Congressman Jordan's legislation, and we look forward to engaging in this new conversation about how we make the path towards self-sufficiency more clear, and the incentives in federal law match that.
Great,
I'd like to just add a footnote to that. The black community is often a moral barometer of the health of the nation. And prior to the 1960s, 85% of all black families had a man and a woman raising children. 85%. But since the 60s and intervention, that has now gone down to 30%. And if race and poverty spending were the cure, then Detroit should be a social reform mecca. But it isn't, because the problem is structurally 70% of every dollar spent on poor people does not go to poor people. It goes to those that serve poor people. They ask not which problems are solvable, but which ones are fundable this year. So you have perverse incentives for professional service providers to serve the poor, no matter how compassionate they may be. If their income and their careers are dependent upon having people to serve, no matter how compassionate, you're asking them to sacrifice their own personal careers and their income in order to empower poor people. Conservatives, by contrast, have no proprietary or strategic interest in the existence of poverty, and therefore they've got more of an incentive to partner with the people suffering the problem. But we've got to make that kind of leap and demonstrate to people that we're willing to. And the final point is we must come up with non-governmental interventions. For instance, in Indianapolis, Indiana, you have a program there where a church that I took Congressman Ryan. For example, you have Kurt Moore. Kurt spent 13 years in federal prison, and he came out, found Christ, and didn't leave him in prison, but brought him with him. But Kurt needed a job, so he was given a job in this ministry that worked with him, washing cars for another member of the church for 4 months. He said, "Why don't you go in business for yourself?" So Kurt was given a beat-up van and some equipment, and Kurt started washing cars in people's driveways. 2 years after that, he now employs 15 people. He has contracts with 23 car dealerships to wash trucks. But Kurt, and so we need to come in. John Williams is a local business guy, and so now they are in partnership to talk about giving him access to capital because he has to buy new equipment, but he doesn't have any credit because he was in prison. But when we can come in and partner with people like that, provide access to capital, coaching, and so that we can begin to establish these kind of relationships all over the country, and the church has 15 other entrepreneurs, rather than vilifying the rich, let's provide the means for wealthy people to share their strategies for creating wealth and also their business acumen so that we can grow and generate jobs by building on the strengths of people in those communities. So we really need to always talk in terms of what is working in those communities, how can we build on those strengths, and you will find that when Kurt has when asked about minimum wage, he'll have a different response than some advocate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Great. Well, let's open it up for questions. Right here. Yes, sir.
Question for Jim. Could you pass a law to waive minimum wage for, let's say, kids under 20?
Yeah, it might not get signed by the president, but we could work on. I mean, I think Bob's comments were right on target. Let's do what works, not what people here in Washington, think may work or is proven that doesn't work. So yeah, we could focus on that kind of thing, but getting it across the finish line would be difficult in this Congress.
Right here, Jerry.
Good morning. I'm startled by what I thought I heard. The statistic that 70% of the dollars that flow through these programs do not go to the end recipients,
Right.
but are for the infrastructure
Right.
that delivers it. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The one study done back at that time, the Liberal Community Service Society of New York City looked at all of the various poverty programs. They concluded, they were the first study that I saw that says that 70% of all dollar goes to social workers, psychologists, drug counselors, foster care systems, the care for kids, just a whole variety of services, systems, yes.
So,
One thing to remember in that statistic is that it'll vary program to program, and some federal programs are cash assistance.
Right.
Some are social services, so it's a payment for a service.
so one other question for whoever. Some of the things you're talking about, the perverse incentives in a lot of the programs that actually subsidize the lack of work, and this is true with many federal programs. How much recognition of the perversity of some of these incentives that are in these programs is recognized by the Democrat Party and as a barrier to actually getting some sensible things done?
My reaction is not much. One of the things our legislation seeks to do is let's at least start to get our arms around everything that's going on. I mentioned 77, Jennifer mentioned 80. It's a lot of programs. It's somewhere in that range. You got job training, education, nutrition, all kinds of different categories where you got this agency doing something that's probably redundant with some other. So just getting your arms around that could be helpful. That's one of the things we seek to do. Let's find out how much we're spending, and then let's account for it. So that's a step in the right direction. But every time it's tried where you have this, I like the way Bob described these three categories of folks. But the tough love component does work. We did this back in the mid-'90s when they passed legislation federally. We did the same. It was my first term in the Ohio House of Representatives. We did it in the state of Ohio. And I can still remember I offered the amendment on the floor, and it was an all-out debate. They had this deal worked out, Republicans and Democrats, welfare reform, job training, all these good things in there, but there was no tough love component. And I was just a dumb rookie, and I thought, well, I can offer an amendment on the floor, and my amendment's going to be real simple. If after 2 years you're an able-bodied adult, we will no longer pay you for not working. 2-year warning. And of course, it was a big debate, and I remember I was scared to death as the first speech I gave, and it was a major kind of piece of legislation. But it passed, and it worked. And you know what we found? No one got kicked off because deadlines influence behavior. Think about your own life. Deadlines change behavior, and when people saw the deadline coming, guess what they did? They got the skills that Bob was talking about that we've all been talking. They found a job, they got the skills, they moved on to something better for them, better for their family. And we need to recognize that component and make sure it's part of, and it is part of our legislation.
Can I comment once on that? The question about is there recognition across the political spectrum of the wrong incentives that are currently in law? Well, there have been some interesting moments of epiphany, I would say, over the last 25 years about this. There were predictions prior to the welfare reform of 1996 that we've been talking about that there would be 1 million children starving on the streets. Well, quite the opposite happened. And that brought many liberals to affirm that, wow, this kind of a strategy does work. And even on the campaign trail, some of you will remember this, then Senator Barack Obama at the Saddleback Forum for the presidential candidates that Rick Warren held, he was asked to say, what is one issue on which you've changed your political opinion? And he said, I have to say welfare reform. I was on the side that said it was going to be a horror for those poor families, but I have to admit it was a success. So there are these moments of epiphany. You can't fight the facts of how this has worked in the past. We should talk about it, and we should apply that logic to other of these programs.
Great. Right down here.
Congressman Jordan, you said that deadlines spur action. Obviously, just last week, a deadline for about 1.7 million people right now, the unemployment insurance extension was not enacted by the Senate and wasn't going through. Are these people not finding jobs because of a lack of action or lack of trying, or is there a bigger issue that does need to be addressed?
I think it's a host of things. You got the phenomenon that was cited in the CBO, what Obamacare can be doing. You've got the fact that if they've been on unemployment for extended period of time, they're not always the first applicant that an employer is going to go for. So there's that dynamic. There's a host of reasons there, and a lot of things we can do in the policy area that will help the overall economy. I mean, you got tax policy, regulatory policy, sound money policy, debt problems. All those things contribute to the fact that we're not growing, including Obamacare and its disincentives, and the welfare program and the disincentives there. What we need to focus on, though, is, and I keep coming back to this, policies that empower people. When Bob was speaking earlier, I was struck. I keep telling stories here, but it reminds me of things that we did when this welfare reform initiative was moving in the mid-'90s. In the mid-'90s in Ohio, we did a thing, school choice program in Cleveland First one went all the way to the Supreme Court, was found constitutional on the Establishment Clause grounds and was held up. At the time, Cleveland had a graduation rate of 32%, spending about $6,500 per kid. The program started first, kindergarten, first and second grade. We gave a scholarship worth $2,250, and we offered 2,000 spots. On the initial sign-up day, 7,000 moms on a mission, kicking and scratching to get the golden ticket, lined up for that golden ticket. And think about what they were saying. Keep your 6,500, give me 2,250 and freedom to get to a better school. And the typical family, to Bob's point, single mom, many of them African American, many of them had been on or were on some kind of public assistance, but they knew one thing. They wanted a better life for their kid. And they didn't want their kid going to, at the time, Cleveland Public Schools. And so that's an empowerment model right in those neighborhoods where people could see, whoa, my neighbor down the street got one of these golden tickets for their kid. I got to get one for mine. And it worked, and it's still going on today. And it's helped a lot of kids. So that's got to be the focus as well, empowering people in these difficult neighborhoods, going in there and making a difference right in their family.
And just one more quick thing. Mr. Woodson, you said that the conservatives need to be the champions of the third percenter who are doing things, as you would say, it the right way, not the 70% who aren't. But an elected official has to be responsive to 100% of their constituency. How does somebody reconcile that?
Well, it's not a matter of you ignoring the 70%. It's just that as conservatives, we need to know how many of those people born in the 70%, but who have recovered from it, who have been redeemed. I don't see any conservative redemption studies. I took members of Congress to, in Washington, D.C., a drug and alcohol treatment program that's faith-based, where there were 50 marriages of people who were in drugs, on jail, but who have recovered from it and now restored their lives. We need to go beyond the initial 70% and say, well, how many people have recovered from this bad start they had? How many have been recovered, and what is the state of those people? And then we need to be reporting on and writing columns and articles about restoration and redemption. And every time you hear conservative, instead of us always being low-budget liberals, we must be the group that inspires people to say, even though you may have had a bad start, redemption is possible. Redemption is here. Here's evidence of it. At our banquets, I want you to meet two young ladies, for instance, who were homeless in a homeless shelter, and now they're in college. One of them graduated high school valedictorian, and the other salutatorian. And they were studying by the cell phone light from their mother's phone. Well, they ought to be conservative champions. Every banquet, every conference, and I know of at least 7 or 8 young people like this born under some very trying and difficult circumstances, but triumphed over these very hard conditions. We ought to be writing about them.
Bob participated in a project that we did in 2009 called Seek Social Justice, and Star Parker did as well, and others. We did exactly what Bob was talking about, correctly diagnose what the challenges are and how to overcome them. And it was stories about family, about churches, about communities, businesses, so often portrayed as the bad guy in this conversation about poverty, but really with important service to give to a community in terms of offering opportunities for work and for training. One reason that Bob's work is so important, and it's important for many reasons, but he helps us diagnose the things that go beyond the material in this conversation. And we have had too much of a materialistic conversation for the last half century. We need to go deeper, and the challenges are deeper. Really, it's a lot of social capital and relational capital.
Right.
And the organizations that are working with Bob are ones that are building relationships. They're meeting individuals at a relational level and helping them. We take for granted the way that social capital has helped us to where we are today. And so many Americans do not have that luxury. But we can give that. We can give that. And that's an opportunity that all of us need to be exploring in the various spheres of society, not just in public policy.
Great. Star Parker. Thank you. Back to the question of wage law. I'm wondering, you know, this gentleman's question and rolling it in. We have the high ground now on school choice, and thanks to Cleveland and the Supreme Court decision in 2003, we actually are winning that in these poor communities. But wage is a challenge because work is a challenge, as you have suggested. So I'm wondering if the president is having now discussions about $10.10. We could perhaps look at these hard-hit zip codes and offer a wage of $5 to begin, as the congressman in the last session said, the national dialogue. We might not be able to get anything through, but work has to be created in these environments. There's a competition in these at-risk communities with the illegal community that is at $2. So perhaps this is a good time to roll it into welfare reform. Is there any opportunity for
No,
that?
good point. And again, I'll go back to my remarks. You know, you think about the first job you had where you learned those valuable skills and principles. It was probably working for less than minimum wage. So I think you make a good point, and it's something we certainly should explore as we're working. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm open to that. Definitely open to that.
I tell people who are out of work, volunteer. You can't get any more sub-minimum than that. And demonstrate to people that you have value, then they'll hire you. And once they hire you, they're not going to let you go. So that's what we've got to do. It's that entry ramp.
Great point.
Right here.
I just, two points. One, I just learned that internships are under attack now, that you have obligations as someone bringing on an intern, which is now scaring people from bringing on internships. My larger point is that inspiration is apolitical. The narrative we hear is jobs, jobs, jobs. Entrepreneurs, freelancers, small business, and self-employed persons are disciplined people who build success from little more than a dream. It could be a baking shop starting at a kitchen table. But it's being, again, decimated by the theft of content from the online technology companies. My focus tends to be IP and having an idea that people can start at home. So what are you doing to ensure and protect neighborhood and individual enterprise from technology stealing people's hopes for moving forward? And separate from that, whatever you're running for, Mr. Woodson, I'm on board.
Well, God bless those who got nothing to say and got the good sense not to say it. So I'll defer to my colleagues on that one.
Yeah, technology is not my area of expertise. I think you have on the agenda. Or do you
We
have
did
already
this
had that.
morning,
Okay,
yeah,
you
we
had
talked
something
about
from Mr. Salmon in the technology area. Yeah, we should protect people's intellectual property across the board. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Great
you.
point.
Thank you. Right here.
This is really a comment. I did call Harry Reid's office to tell him what I thought about his opinion about the CBO report.
Good for you.
That I wasn't really that stupid,
Yeah.
even though I'm a senior citizen. And I got yelled at and hung up on by the person at Harry Reid's office. He needs to hire somebody else. Second point is one of my
Can you
first
work on that
jobs. That's what the
You
reaction.
get yelled at by the person you
I got
pay their
yelled
salary,
at.
right?
He told me I don't have time
Such
to
a
listen
deal.
to people like you. That's Harry Reid's office. I called a lot of people. Harry Reid's office was the best. I did my first job out of college, and I always wondered about this, was the war on poverty. And I worked out on Long Island, very high unemployment. And my job was Youth Corps, Job Corps, to send people to training programs to acquire skills that jobs were available for, meat cutters, so on and so forth. I only lasted 1 year, and it turned me into a conservative from a bleeding heart liberal. I sent certainly I recruited at least 100 people to go to different training programs. At the end of the year, I discovered only 2 people had completed the training programs. One wound up in prison anyway. But of the other 98, they kept going for a couple of weeks and coming back. And what I discovered was the incentive. In my young heart, thought, okay, they want to get skills and be in the middle class, which I wanted. I came from total poverty. But they really didn't want that. They wanted the plane ride. So once they were there a couple of weeks and it was really boring and they had to learn a skill, they quit and come back, and I'd send them on another plane ride. And I've always wondered if anybody ever tracked how many people, how many millions of dollars went away on that program. That was our president's program, Lyndon B. Johnson. Do you know that anybody ever tracked that and found out if there were 3 people who finished the program?
I can't comment on that specific, although we could certainly look that up for you. But what I will say is how the structure of the policy that Congressman Jordan is introducing would work. First of all, it's based on the simple premise that we should provide a hand up, not a handout. This is an extraordinarily popular idea with Americans. Upwards of 80, 90% of Americans are supportive of these policies based on polling that we did a couple years back. And the fact is that if you are receiving aid, you should be working, looking for work, or at least preparing for work. And it's a very flexible policy. The policy would say by 2016, 4 million people need to be participating on a monthly basis in work activities, either working, looking for work, preparing for work. And it focuses attention first on able-bodied adults without dependents, a particular population in the food stamp recipient list that has been growing pretty dramatically over recent years. So states would be required to focus on them, to put them on that path towards self-sufficiency, to make the incentive structure in the food stamp program work on behalf of that individual's dignity, not encouraging over the long-term dependency. So that's the basic structure, and it would require regular check-ins so you would know what's happening. And that kind of incentivizing we've seen from TANF helps people in the first place look harder for work, and it has a dissuasion effect, what we call a dissuasion effect at the front end, but it also makes sure that people don't languish on the rolls longer than is helpful for their future, for their resume, and really tries to move them as quickly as possible towards productive, self-sufficient work.
Great. Right here.
Congressman Jordan, there was an opportunity, I guess, last week, or maybe the week before last, with the Farm Bill for reform with the food stamp program. And I don't know if there was an effort amongst members of the House to, for example, with work incentives or asset tests or anything.
Yes.
And the cuts that were made were very minuscule in a program that's increased over 100% in the last 4 years.
Yep.
So I was wondering what happened there, and what sort of effort there was, and was it just a fact of there's no chance it's going to pass the Senate? Or another disappointment was I know you guys try to decouple,
Right.
and then unfortunately they're going to be on the same path for 5 years.
Let's look at the glass half full. There were some minor changes made that were positive in the food stamp program. Some volunteer encouragement of states to enact work requirements. Our bill basically builds on that and makes it much stronger and actually mandatory. Yeah, I voted against the Farm Bill. I don't like the fact that we combine it, the nutrition program, with the commodity programs. I think that makes no sense. Split them up and have 2 different bills, which is what we initially had coming out of the House. They were put back together in the conference, and obviously the bill ended up the way it did. Look, when you got the years we've had recently in agriculture, we should be phasing it towards a free market, much more market-oriented system, and that's why you saw several of us vote against the final package.
The policy we need to pursue is one that changes the character of public assistance so that it offers a hand up, not a handout.
Well said.
And that's what the food stamp policy in Congressman Jordan's bill is trying to do. And that's to be distinguished from what happened in the Farm Bill context, because it's just changes around the edges, some suggestions that hopefully a few states will do some work requirements, but it's not changing the character of public assistance in a way that'll promote self-sufficiency.
And there's no reason we can't come back to this again next year.
Right.
I mean, it is possible that next year you have more conservatives in the Senate. You can take up the nutrition title next year alone.
Hopefully
do
6.
it right next year, and then we try to get that through the Senate. It was a tough loss for conservatives when they put the 2 bills back together, but we made a very strong, powerful point throughout that entire debate about ending that unholy alliance between rural Republicans and urban Democrats.
As far as meat testing or anything along those lines is very difficult. President Obama, Democratic Senate.
Yep.
Just the decoupling is something that I think is a strategic goal.
No, it was huge.
Yeah,
That was
absolutely.
I mean, that was. was Heritage and Heritage Action helping us big time with that. First time it'd been, I think, in 50 years where they'd been split for at least going through one body of the Congress.
This lady here.
Yeah.
As part of the bill, is there any incentive in there for companies to work with companies who would hire welfare recipients to work, so that'd be a way of keeping track of the people who are looking for work? Years ago, when welfare reform had first taken place, I was an office manager at a law firm, and we brought in a young lady who was on welfare, and she had to go to work. And part of it was that it was I don't know, we had received a letter or something that encouraged small businesses to hire these young people. And then the welfare social worker had to send the individual to a company, and then we in turn had to provide proof that they were working. And this young lady had 3 children and is now the manager at the company where I worked.
That's great.
Here's an
Okay?
example.
And put her
That's
3
great.
kids through college.
You know,
Right.
the policy
Here's
is a
an example.
requirement on the administrators at the state level. But those smart administrators are going to be reaching out with creative strategies just like that. And I know you have stories about this kind of thing, Bob, where the creative partnership with businesses to help people enter work.
It really does, and that's how we overcome this vilification of wealthy people. We need to look at them as partners. But the example you gave is just perfect, and it's been echoed throughout. We did this for the whole state of Ohio doing TANF. We went around the country introducing TANF to local businesses and grassroots leaders who inspire people to change their values and attitudes and change. But we just need to have a whole conference. We had 3 days of just celebrating solutions. And so I just think that we need to do that more. Just have conferences where we just bring people together and exchange strategies of redemption.
Yeah, you want to encourage flexibility. Under our legislation, if the states that are doing it well, and get this thing rolling and get it passed, the states are doing it well, then they get block granted the dollars. So that's flexibility, and then the flexibility you're talking, that is all good. I mean, again, that's how you meet the needs of in these communities Bob's talking about.
We have time for one more question. Right here.
Thank you. Perhaps all of you could respond to this. I'm deeply concerned about, especially since the president made the comment a few weeks ago about marijuana and minimizing its seriousness, and also talking about the states of Washington and Colorado and the experiment going on there, which is against federal law. I wonder, how do you incorporate in the kinds of public assistance programs disincentives for using drugs like marijuana and other mind-altering drugs?
I'll comment, just some states have experimented with having drug testing be a part of their assistance programs, and that's shown to be quite effective, so. Any comments?
Well, I mean, I'm like you. I was disappointed in the president's somewhat cavalier statements regarding the use of marijuana. I mean, I just think that's not the kind of message you want the leader of the United States, the President of the United States, making. So I was disappointed as well. And we are certainly open to what Jennifer suggested, which is some kind of drug testing requirement.
Also, it wasn't at all fact-based in that if one goes to Nora Volkow's website for the National Institute of Drug Abuse, she recently had a conversation, 2-hour conversation with the Dalai Lama in India. And they show during this exchange an extraordinary number of brain scans. And it's been determined now that individuals under 25 years old will have permanent brain damage and lose as many as 10 points in their IQ for using marijuana. And these are facts that the president should have known about, didn't, and I think it's very much ill-served the whole country as a result.
Notwithstanding the legal and the physical problems, it's interesting that the president talks about job generation in the inner city. Walmart, one of the companies, comes into a city like this and they drug test 200 young people in those distressed neighborhoods, and only 10% could pass the drug test. And yet you got city council members cavalierly saying, oh, we need to, eliminate, make it legal and more access. At the same time, they're saying young people need to work. I mean, it's just, that's the kind of moral confusion that is being spread throughout this society. We're just confusing young people.
Thank you. And I'll make a quick programming note. We're going to next be moving to the healthcare panel. Senator Cruz will be after the healthcare panel. And we're going to take a briefer break, 4 or 5 minutes here. And you're going to go, please join me in thanking this panel and our speaker for a great job.